So it is a wonderful honor and pleasure to be here to introduce the inaugural Henry Richardson Lecture. Just such a delight to celebrate him and his life's work, and of course to have who could be a better speaker than Gabe McDougall. The person we have to thank for being able to put this on is our wonderful Dean, Rachel Ricochet, and I will let her get us started. Thanks are in order. I want to thank Josette Finnegan, who's done a wonderful job helping organize this. Dorothy Lee, who's also done a fantastic job in organizing this. Jim Bretschneider, and Nicole Regis Eisenstein. And last but not least, of course, Alexandra Peachy. So wherever she is, okay, there she is. Thank you all for organizing. Of course, a big, huge thanks to Jan Amsterdam. Really, the vision for this and has made it happen, and we have her to thank for this terrific program that we're going to enjoy. I want to thank also our sponsors, Basel, the Institute for International Law and Public Policy, Temple's BALSA, Temple International Law Students Association, and the Temple International Comparative Law Journal. And so, as Jay had mentioned, we hope that this is the first of a yearly lecture that celebrates the work of our dear colleague Hank. This is the idea generated by Basel, to honor Hank and to think about and remember his contributions as a scholar of race and international law. He's been a mentor to me, to countless faculty, to so many in the field of international law. And we owe him just profound thanks for the legacy he has created and the work that he has contributed. I just have to mention very quickly, you know that Hank is the author of a 2020 report, the Richardson Report for ASIL, which identified historical exclusion of people of color from the society. It really, I think, changed the way ASIL works. So those in international law know that better than me. But even as someone who doesn't work in international law, I know the Richardson Report, and I am thankful for Hank's leadership there. He's one of the seminal books on the origins of African-American interest in international law, has helped define the field. He joined our faculty in 1981. He retired last year. I could go on and on about Hank's accomplishments and how much he means to Temple. Just look in the audience at his colleagues who are here because we love you. And we are so honored to have you as part of the Temple family. So, we're delighted to be hosting Professor Gabe McDougall as the inaugural Richardson Lecture, given prominence in the field of international law generally and your groundbreaking and crucially important work on race and international law. So just a few accomplishments, because this could be the entire lecture. Just a few. Among many impressive accomplishments, Professor McDougall is currently an independent expert serving on the UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. She previously served on the CERD committee as the first American to serve. She has previously served as the United Nations independent expert on minority issues and the convener of the United Nations Forum on Minority Issues, as well as a member on the UN Subcommission on the Promotion and Protection of Human Rights. She is Executive Director of Global Rights from 1994 to 2006, Director of the Southern Africa Project of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Law, served as a member, Independent Electoral Commission of South Africa and South Africa's first democratic elections. So her service in South Africa in particular, culmination of many years of work that Hank was a part of. I just can't think of anyone better to honor Hank's legacy and his contributions than you, Professor. Thank you. So with that, I'll turn it back to Jada. And I'm taking the red one.
So I'm going to ask Peg to come up here first to do a little bit of the introduction to Professor McDougall, and now I'll just say there was a little bit of back and forth between them because they both wanted to introduce the other, and Peg won. So.
I missed this place. I quite missed it enough not to have retired. Let me again express my deep appreciation to Dean William Shea, Associate Dean Ramsey McCullough, Associate Dean Don Harris, Dorothy Lee, Seth Finnegan, others for making this lecture. I greatly appreciate it. It's good to return to society. I gave my best to Temple Law. We must put up, we collectively, with many institutions. But this law school is one of the few institutions that I really believe. So far, it has sustained that belief. Now, I would not have been able to teach here without the forbearance, sacrifices, and support of my late wife of 45 years, Renee Rousseau, which she made over the decades to enable us to have a successful and loving commuter marriage between Philadelphia and Washington. To her goes much credit for the reasons you honor me today. Honor her with. You at the law school became my second family. Collectively over the decades, knowing my strengths and deficits as well, perhaps sometimes better than I did myself. I will never forget your friendship and collegiality. In teaching and writing and being part of the life of law school, I tried to understand and convey the theory and the application of law in terms of justice and equity to people globally, nationally, and as individuals, including people of color. I am grateful to Temple and its basic equitable principles for giving me throughout the support to do so. I pray that these principles, this mission, will remain strong and expansive as the school faces the global and the local resurgence of aggressive racism and related extremism, battles in which it must fail. I feel especially honored today that this inaugural lecture is being given by David. We have been fortunate as a faculty and as a student body over the years to receive the wisdom and principles of historic accomplishment, and we do so again today. Now, without reviewing her formidable, and I say formidable, resume, as an international human rights lawyer in the widest sense of advocacy. I will note two historic achievements. For gay is a historic event. Two historic achievements of Gay's work. First, beginning in the early 1970s, Gay set out to build an international framework for the joint actions and collaborations of liberation lawyers in South Africa and liberation lawyers in the United States to give critical structure to underpin the emerging global anti-apartheid. Through established legal organizations and her leadership in building non-governmental organizations, this framework grew in global activity and impact as a critical element to ensure that the South African liberation struggle escaped the destructive pitfalls of the apartheid government and its allies and became truly an effective global movement. My work in Southern Africa was guided by this framework, and Gay was my leader. It is not surprising, skip a number of years, that Gay was standing at his right hand as Nelson Mandela cast his vote for a liberated South Africa in 1990. Second, Gay's work through the United Nations has been historic in a second way. To the UN, she has picked up the mantle. In the UN, she has picked up the mantle of leadership in establishing the authority of African American human rights in the United States as grounded also in international. This struggle against much US opposition was defined by W.E.B. Du Bois and a few others shortly after the American ratification of the UN Charter and has historical origins back to slavery. Gay's strategic and targeted UN work, including as an original UN independent expert and through her work on the Committee to Eliminate Racial Discrimination, has expanded and framed and focused Du Bois' mission today. It has given African American rights and rights interpretations vis-a-vis the United States an expanded international law foundation available for wider jurisprudence against restrictive US interpretations. I am therefore especially honored that the law school was invited, gave me to this.
Thank you, Hank. So I'd like to invite Professor McDougall to come up to speak now. She'll speak for about 40 to 45 minutes, and then we'll have questions both from people in the room and also people who are viewing this over Zoom. And I'll take questions from Zoom and from and I also realized that we overlooked thanking that our IT team, who has been so important, Jean Nair.
Well, first of all, what can I say? Thank you. To have that framing from you of what I have tried to do day in and day out. It's just, thank you. But frankly, I'm here to praise you. I'm here to praise a friend and a colleague. Someone who has inspired generations represented in this room of Black international lawyers to follow his footsteps and own our place shaping international law, shaping it as scholars, shaping it as practitioners, and shaping it as activists, which is what I call myself. Henry, you deserve our praise and you deserve our gratitude. You have made a place for all of us in the classrooms, in the associations of influence around international law, in government, and yet in the work of activism and in resistance. I remember the first time I met you, Hank. You know, I'm not gonna call you Hank in this formal setting.
Wait.
I was working on the staff of the National Conference of Black Lawyers. And I hope we all know that he was a co-founding member of the National Conference of Black Lawyers, along with someone else who was a dear friend and mentor, Haywood Burns. So, I mean, when I say activist, this guy, you know, you hear him talk and his super, you know, deep thoughts, and you don't say activist. This is a race man. Always has been, right? Working at NCBL, I was a young lawyer, and NCBL at that time had done two missions trips to Cuba. He went on the first one, I went on the second one. This was about circa 1973 or so. And I was given the job of organizing a congressional briefing. And, you know, when you are briefing Congress, you write a page and a half with bullet points in it, right? That's all they can consume. And everybody complied in this group, except here's this 20 by 30 page. This guy, on the phone, we never met before. I don't know if you remember this. I was trying to talk you down. For an hour. I said, and when I moved to Washington, D.C. to be a full-time anti-apartheid lawyer as director of the Southern Africa Project Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, I recruited Hank to be on my litigation committee, along with Gola Butcher, who also played a very important role in the American, well, as an international lawyer, as a patent breaker, and a few other people. And we put a lot of effort into trying to find unique ways to use the law to break the apartheid regime or, you know, maybe create an irritant. You know, so we would do things like we filed suit to stop the enriched uranium from being exported from the U.S. to South Africa. I remember that's when I first met the great R.B., who was on the Court of Appeals at that time. And so this matter came before her. And you know, in Washington at that time, you found allies in all sorts of interesting places, you know. So that's when we met the great R.B. On the court. And we filed since we filed amicus briefs before South African courts. I don't know if you remember the Kingwani matter, when we filed an amicus brief to try to stop the South African court from declaring independence, the Kaiwani Bantustan. And he joined me and others in this group of very prestigious Americans that I took to be election observers for the independence elections in Namibia. Not a glamorous thing. It sounds glamorous now, but I remember we rented remember the room we rented a house, right? And my room had a bunker in it. A bunker to let you know the situation we were in at the time. But it was, those were some times I don't think we'll ever forget. And your leadership in the American Society of International Law has been mentioned, but it's really been extraordinary. At a time in the 1980s when I saw no place for me or my view of international legal principles in such an august and, white and male institution. I mean, he was in there breaking barriers. He was the first African-American elected to the American Journal of International Law. He established the Gold Butcher Award medal and practically single-handedly raised the funds to endow the medal. And he was co-founder of the Blacks in American Society of International Law, which has been a real draw of international lawyers, Black international lawyers into an institution that had none before, except for a few. And of course, it's already been mentioned the Richardson Report, which is a tour de force. And I like to just show it to some other groups that I'm in. Really was a tour de force because, you know, they did a lot of work. They found no document that said Blacks should not be allowed, but didn't stop them from identifying their violations of some core principles of American and international law, and you know, holding them responsible for that and outlining some ways that they could begin to make reparations. So, you know, it's just, you brought a lot of us to tables where we just didn't think we had a reason to be before. But of course, your most enduring legacies arise from your scholarship. It is a quintessential towering intellectual. I mean, surpassed by none. Through his scholarship, he's done us all, he's opened some avenues in our minds and in others' minds. For example, he shined a light on our forefathers and foremothers who, through their aspirations and acts of resistance, were indeed actors in the construction of international law. So when today we demand reparations and the perpetrators say to us, well, oh no, it wasn't a violation of international law. At the time, it wasn't illegal. You know, this thing about customary law, you know, everybody felt it was okay to do, nobody objected. And, you know, you cite Dr. Richardson. And he says, oh no, there were plenty of objections. You just didn't want to look at them. You know, when the newly kidnapped Africans, he and she jump over the side of the boat, legs and arms still in our chains, into the deep waters of the Atlantic. I think that was an objection. When the slaves jumped ship and formed the Maroons, I think there was an objection. In every single slave revolt be they successful or not, be they Nat Turner, Toussaint Louverture, the Amistad, there were objections all over the place. These have to be recognized, if not then now. And so, you know, he's actually opened some avenues that we all now are running through to finally hold accountable those who should not have been violating the rights of ordinary people in the past. And so this is a good segue, I think, to the substance of what I'm going to talk about today, because it is, for me, a bit of what I've been trying to do: open new pathways, show new ways. What are the origins? What are the interests that we as African Americans have in international law? You know, what can it do for us? What do principles of law and the international sphere mean for them? And can we make them? Not just try to fit into them. And so that's what I've been trying to do at the UN. And as I start today, let me just say to you that what I'm going to talk about today is you know, I mean, I don't speak London inspirations always are. Of course, I've been in the UN now for 22 years in human rights and human rights institutions, mechanisms, independent experts, as they call us. I've also had a recent forum where I brought together those of us that are independent experts in UN forums on anti-racism matters. And we all sat down in front of an audience and talked about, candid talk, about what are the blockages that we've been having, and the gaps as well, and what are the successes, and which way is forward. And this number 3 is, I've gotten great inspiration from my collaboration with Tendai Akinwumi, who is a former special rapporteur on racism until last November. And she and I have just completed an article on this that will be in the ASIL Unbound coming up. And it was really a joy and a education to collaborate with her on this. And we start our piece by saying racial justice and equality remain contested internationally. And the United Nations remains a prominent site for this contestation. This one, to tease this out, I want to describe the institutional architecture of the UN. That's focused, thank you, on anti-racism, as we now call it. Thank you. And I want to talk about some recent innovations in the normative framework and the institutional structures. And then I want to point out some of the shortcomings and dysfunctions that are built into this architecture, and discuss the pressing threats and challenges and successes, of course, that we've had and that still remain before us. And then finally, I want to talk about backlash. You know, that thing that always comes when you feel you're making progress. And it's in the UN as well. So, as you all are fully aware, When the United Nations was established in the 1940s, much of the world remained under European colonial domination and then Jim Crow rule in some places I won't mention. But this was also buttressed by transnational legal and political regimes, all of which really was entrenched in racial domination. And so those who sat down around the table to design the United Nations, to draft the UN Charter, and later the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, were primarily colonial, imperialist, and former enslaving powers. And they still at that time, as they still are now, invested in global racial hierarchy. The UN Charter has some very stirring language, but it is fundamentally about peace and security and sovereign equality between nations. And while the Universal Declaration of Human Rights brings to the fore the rights of individuals, quote, on an equal basis without distinction on race, its focus on individual rights gave little room for addressing discrimination against racial groups. So when W.B. Du Bois, whoever mentioned that name, which I would mention again, to challenge Eleanor Roosevelt to move from rhetoric to action, to hold the U.S. accountable for racial discrimination based on the Universal Declaration for Human Rights, which she had just promoted, she politely buried the request. And instead created a subcommission on the prevention of discrimination against minorities, which, by the way, was the first body, UN body, that I was ever elected to in 1995. And, you know, I got on that and it became clear to me the concept of minorities in international law at that time really did not include racial minorities. It was only with the success of the decolonization movement when, you know, there were a number of African countries and a few Asian as well, mainly African, that soon became a critical mass of countries that took their seats at the UN as members, and they had a first agenda item. And their agenda was to codify what had been a customary rule against racial discrimination, and they codified the, let's see if I can do this, no? The UN, the International Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. And within that is the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, the body that I sit on now. We oversee compliance with the treaty. So that was the first move. The convention and the practice of the committee still remain the centerpiece of the UN's efforts against racism. And while virtually every other human rights treaty does begin with a recitation of non-discrimination, it's really still this body that does all of the heavy lifting in terms of racial discrimination in the UN. But, you know, on the positive side, the treaty, the convention, has a very broad palette in terms of non-discrimination. There is, at this point, there is universal ratification 185 or so countries from every region of the world. Every religion of the world has ratified, the Convention Against Racial Discrimination. So there's broad acceptance. We got total buy-in there. But there are some significant limitations as well. The Race Convention is ahistorical. It's as if racism just dropped from, the heavens. No mention of the past at all. That or of intergenerational harms that could come. So, bringing that within our jurisprudence is a tough battle. Secondly, to a significant degree, there is no recognition of transnational applications of racial discrimination or accountability for transnational harms. Responsibility for racism in the UN as well as in the normative framework that's applied in the UN happens within the territorial limits of one nation state or a nation state. You don't go and say, well, you're responsible for, Canada. What about, your corporations, what they're doing in Latin America to the indigenous groups? That's not our jurisdiction. But today, that's a very important question. The reach of racial endeavors is broad. Maybe always was, but in this globalized world, it's very important. For example, when we wanted to, and I finally got my colleagues to go along with it, but to not be able within our framework to talk about the racial misdistribution of vaccines for COVID. So, okay, it's going to kill half the Black world because they don't have vaccines. Is that not within the power of our body to address? And the answer is not really. What has happened is that there has been offshoring, if you will, of a racial, discriminatory activities beyond the reach of the UN. The UN is not as important as it used to be in the world, even in terms of peace and security. Have we had any discussions at the UN of any significance about the war in Ukraine? The development agenda, which is the main thing at the UN right now, the much vaunted UN 2030 development agenda, doesn't say a word about race. And it's not because they weren't asked to. They didn't overlook it. But how are you going to talk about developing the world if you're not going to talk about, racial discrimination, both within and between countries? Sustainable development goals. All these things are very, but they are beyond the reach of UN normative work on racial discrimination or even the jurisprudence of our community. But they are centers of influence and increasingly so. Look at the WTO. So, we've got some real problems in terms of how we are able to address some of the most critical issues of discrimination in the world today. Now, as a separate matter, just to go further on this question of the architecture, a separate wing of the UN, human rights enforcement mechanisms exist under the UN Human Rights Council, which is a body of 47 governments. And they've got an array of special rapporteurs that do investigations, all of that. And that's where Tendai was sitting as a special rapporteur on racism. And, you know, they basically operated with the normative framework that was created through the Convention on Racism. But they were able to go to countries and get deep dives into the understanding the real, you know, reality of racism there. And since they were more independent than we were on the committee, she was able to leapfrog over normative or institutional barriers that might, you know, get in her way. But that depends on who's in the position. And it's taken us years to get somebody as good as her in that position. And I'll mention this later when I'm talking about pushback. But anyway, this is all we had during the 20th century. But, you know, in the UN, the important thing during that period was getting rid of apartheid. So everything was focused on that. By the end of the 20th century, the beginning of the 21st century, the question was, well, now what? And the answer came through the holding of the Third World Conference Against Racism in Durban in 2001. And I'm going to tell you, I was there, you know, participated heavily in it. Of course, I can't tell you how seminal that event was, because the question of now what was both stimulating to civil society, but scary to the governments, because they knew that now what is that every country in the world, every region in the world has racism. And we're going to all turn to that now. So it was a tremendous push-pull experience. 40,000 people came to Durban. And it was historic in that it reoriented the UN system and its member states' approaches to battling racism. The outcome document, the Durban Declaration and Program of Action, the DDPA, fused the anti-colonial, anti-racism, anti-xenophobic commitments, and it situated contemporary racism within its necessary historic and structural context. So the transatlantic slave trade and colonialism became primary topics to be considered in everything else henceforth. It also linked racism to the economic and political inequalities in the world, and said clearly that the situation of Black people today, both in countries and between countries, is a consequence of those violations of law and human rights. And that was truly historic. It was unprecedented. It was broad. It talked about the transnational issues. And it was first time that such a broad transnational civil society presence had impact on what the UN began to think and do. Now, it also gave us the dreaded pushback. Because there are two things that happened. In looking at, history and crimes against humanity and all of these, the next word you get is reparations. And the European Union, the United States, the Western groups, they were not having it. So they threw down the gauntlet there. But there's another thing that happened, is that the DPA affirmed the human rights of Israelis and Palestinians. And the Western group said, oh no, the Israelis joined the Western group and saying that we're not having that. And they declared that that was anti-Semitic. And from then on, every document, every piece of paper in the UN that had the word Durban in it was blocked by the Western group and Israel. Every single document, no matter what benefit was to come out of that document for the rights of other peoples in the world, it was blocked. So we've been in a 20-year, literally, battle. And it has been a battle. But the other thing is, though, okay, there were some new institutions that came out of Durban. One was the working group of people of African descent. And their job has been to take forward and keep alive, if you will, the focus on the transatlantic slave trade and those people who were affected by it and their descendants. And so they've become very important, even though their funding has every year been blocked by the US, the EU, and Israel. So it's been, as I said, it's been a battle, and we've been locked in that battle. And what it's meant is that all of the good things that were to come out of Durban, all of the great promises have been held in abeyance. And that's been the situation until 20 years past now from then. And, our next big move forward has unfortunately come, as often these things have come, from the public torture and murder of an innocent Black man on the streets in the US by the police. So shocking the world. And it was so shocking. Maybe we have another one in Memphis. Actually we have about 1,000 a year in the US. And there've been up until now about 6,000 a year in Brazil. And so one of the things that has happened because of uprisings of 2020 the murder of George Floyd, well, there are a number of things. And I'm going to try to go through them quickly because I'm taking too much time. But it's important to note, first of all, civil society, those within the UN like myself, along with a really incredible coalition of civil society people all over the world, got together and pressed the UN, pressed the the Human Rights Council what we were asking for was a commission of inquiry into the murder of George Floyd. We were pushed back by the US that threatened, we asked the Africa group to carry our water, because we didn't have standing. And the US came and they threatened the ambassadors of the African group, said that the aid packages would be withdrawn, said that they wouldn't get elected to be here again next year, etc. Very, very nasty, ugly stuff. But in the end, we won. Not what we were asking for, but we won several significant things. First of all, we won another new mechanism, which is the expert mechanism on racial justice and equality. Well, I call it the George Floyd mechanism. And it is tasked to investigate in countries where it warranted the connection between pattern of murders on the street by police and the history of coming from the slave, bands to now. A kind of attitude toward Black people, right? That allows kind of things that happened to Tyree Nichols, the kind of thing that happened to George Floyd. I mean, police can be ugly and are brutal, lots of places, but there is a special something that is a connector from out of the past, the ugliness of the past, to the streets of today. And so this mechanism is to look into this, and they're on their way to the US right now. And hopefully they will be able to say some things and do some things that are unusual. We also got the High Commissioner to write a really incredible report on these matters. In-depth look at 165 cases all over the world, where they actually pulled the dockets, looked at the cases, looked at impunity matters, and her connection to the past between that has led her to say, to conclude that there must be something done now, that as she entitled her report, time is up, talking to the government, time is up. She put out a 4-point agenda for immediate change that goes, I'll just give you the two lines. 1, reverse the cultures of denial. Racist, etc. Yeah, right. Okay, so in that, and dismantle immediately the structures of systemic racism. Now, this is the first time that a High Commissioner has identified that there are structures of, that it's a structural matter. Get rid of it. Number 2, end impunity for human rights violations by law enforcement officers, and close the trust deficits with the public, particularly people of African descent. 3, ensure that voices of people of African descent, those who stand up against racism, are heard and that their concerns are acted upon. And 4, acknowledge and confront the legacies of slave era, including through accountability and reparatory justice. Now, reparatory justice is as close as being able to go to the word reparations, but we got it, right? And that's a real breakthrough. So, and behind each of these 4 points, there is there's background material, the understandings, and their ways forward in terms of recommendations. We got at the last, the Secretary General to admit that there is racism within the UN. Now, he was forced to do that. And that it negatively impacts the potential of the UN to be fit for purpose to actually guarantee its mission of non-discrimination and equality. That was a big breakthrough. And it's still, you know, I mean, there are strategic action plans and all of this, and you got to see how the sausage comes out the other end. But that's a big breakthrough. Now in the UN, we changed our language. We talk about anti-racism. We talk about anti-Black racism. We talk reparations, African descendants. We have been able to finally get through the permanent forum on people of African descent. It's down here. Which have been languishing. You know, the Western group has been trying to delete it, eliminate it, because it comes out of the Durban. 20 years later, who knows, but it was under the Durban agenda item. But we pushed that through. And, you know, it is technically an advisory body. I'm going to tell you, you know, the first day I walked into the UN after being elected to a body in 1995, I walked into the conference room that first day, and there were like 1,000 people there. And I looked around, and I was the only person, you know, African diaspora person, the only one. There were a few African government representatives, not many of those either. I said, what am I going to do with this? You know, but now 20 years later, I walked into that same room because the launch was in December, and there were 900 people of African descent from every corner, cranny of the world. And it was an inspiration, and they came to speak their truths, and they did, to make clear their grievances, but most important, to claim their rights and to speak about their aspirations for a new world and for a new beginning of this UN process. Out of that is going to come a UN declaration on the rights of people of African descent. And going back to W.B. Du Bois in 1903, when he said, well, racism will be ended only by the commitment of all nations in the world. That's 1903. In 1920, Marcus Garvey made the proclamation of International Declaration on the Rights of the Black Peoples of the World. That was 1920. You know, later, 20 years later or so, W.B. Du Bois and Mary McLeod Bethune and Walter White and others were lobbying in the conferences leading up to the formation of the UN, because they thought that the UN was going to be a place to, a venue in which there could be an expansion of rights for people of African descent. As I said earlier, Mrs. Roosevelt said, wait a minute. And that minute has taken since now. We don't have it all the way, but this is the first time we have a body in which Black people get to speak to Black people. And that is an amazing step forward. So we've got our concerns, we've got our limitations, we haven't fixed the world, Can Fix the World for People of African Descent. But it's been an incredible ride. And as I guess it was Biden who said to George Floyd's daughter that he said, your father has changed the world. And when I hear that, I feel both sad because he had to die. But I think he has. So thank you very much. And thank you for everything. Questions, but you,
Yeah, so if anyone in the audience has a question, raise your hand. If anyone in the chat, in the webinar has questions.
I see a hand here, yes.
This was my question that had is basically this. I had the Congress, the United Nations Committee, certainly, and also the expert lecture. Student asked me last week, why did the front group go to the working group for African descent and not to the committee on elimination for racial uncertainty? I guess it's because the U.S. is not a member.
Why did the U.S. is a member?
Okay,
That's how I get on.
okay, so why didn't that taken before certainly?
What was? I'm sorry.
The George Ford family wrote a letter to me. And is there a mechanism there? I mentioned that, but I just couldn't hear it.
Yeah, what happened was that the family of George Floyd, particularly his brother, said, I want the UN to take this up. He sort of, said it in the air, said it on TV or whatever. That's how I got involved. Now, I was not on CERT at that moment because Trump had bumped me off. So I'm the one that actually worked to build the global coalition of civil society and take it to the UN Human Rights Council. And the reason why I said, because I was the one that said, no, we got to take it there, is that, all of these bodies here, we're all independent experts. We don't work for the governments. We don't work for the UN. So we have no power. We can say what we want, and we're good at saying the right thing. But the governments are the ones that have the power, and they are good at ignoring what we say. So, we decided to get more political and go to the governments directly. And that's how and I said, well, if you go into the Human Rights Council, right? Let's go to the Africa group. The Africa group is the largest group of, states in the UN. And so we asked them to bring the matter to the Human Rights Council to start this ball rolling. That's how it went.
I have lots of questions.
How can we serve you? How can we serve you?
Cool. Well, I think that it's important to look what this year As I said, this body here, the new body, what I call the George Floyd body, is having an official meeting, official investigation in the US. They're going to be asking for people to come forward and give them information, to talk to them about situations that they're familiar with, and to support them in a number of ways. That's where you should come in. Later in the year, the new special rapporteur on racism is going to visit the US and investigate more broadly questions of racial discrimination. You need to give them the information. You need to make sure, and when I do my work and I interact with NGOs, civil society, and I let them know, look, you got to tell me exactly what it is that I should say to help you, because you are the actor here. You're the one that, when they say, oh, we want to be held accountable, I say, okay, you tell me what to say, then you hold them accountable, because you are the ones that they are supposed to be accountable to. So, make sure that you make contact, and I can let you know dates and times and all with them, and give them information. Make sure they understand exactly what you need to do, what you need them to do and to say in order for you to be more effective here. Because you need to be able to say that the UN just said that, what you're doing is wrong under international law. That's the only power I have. To put that on a piece of paper for you. Thank you.
So I do have a couple of questions online. So the
Okay.
first is from Chantal Thomas. Who says, thank you for the wonderful lecture proceeding. In all of the amazing work that you do, what is your sense of whether US-based civil rights groups like the NAACP maintain an interest or presence in international human rights today?
Not enough. That's something I'm constantly, very sad about. In fact, when I used to have a major program of work trying to get US human rights organizations involved, and there was a wonderful, large delegation of civil rights people from all over the country that came to the Durban conference. When Michael Brown's child was killed, his mother and a large delegation came to the UN, to the committee that I sit on. So when specific things happen, I think that US civil rights organizations rise to that possibility of engaging with UN. Thing is, and I know this well from my own experience in US civil rights organizations, there's so much happening in this country on the ground, and in the courts. And right now, civil rights organizations, I think, are too singularly focused on litigation courts. At a time when the judiciary is partly place where you want to go with the real serious problem. The time that it makes sense to come to the UN is when you've got an elaborated advocacy, program. When you want to be able to say, and it would make sense and have power to say that the UN said that what's going on here is wrong. And sometimes that's very important. And in a lot of countries around the world, that's all they can have, because the courts are not open at all. I think we have some critical decisions here to make about how movement here goes forward. I think that we're too singularly invested in litigation. And, you know, we gotta be able to spread out and do a lot of other things. And that's when I think, you know, we can be great partners to the civil rights movement.
Yeah, James.
Yeah, so thank you for all that inspiring work you've done and the great lecture and the conversation you had with Hunt at the beginning. So I wanted to ask you about the carry forward this conversation about what could be done about the relationship between the UN's anti-racism innovation and the broad area of international economic law. So, for example, the work you did on multinational corporations in Namibia, when South Africa had refused to Namibian independence is the kind of rare work sort of linking these colonial legacies and racisms and the role of multinational actors. The UN guiding principles on business and human rights has nothing to do with race. And as we know, there are many questions like sovereign debt that really follow the same racial map that you described. So in terms of thinking, moving forward in light of all the experience that you had, you know, what guidance might you provide for those that are thinking, linking those areas?
Well, I think that you got to dig in, and if you think that the UN can help in those areas, for instance, you know, the guiding principles I have on business and human rights, I have a long list of problems with. You know, it takes pressure. And you have to decide what's the trajectory of your pressure campaign. And if you think that, you know, by getting the Committee on Business and Human Rights to focus in on race, and then I think you can get that, but it will take dedicated effort from the civil society side.
And we have a couple more questions in the chat from one tonight, as you may, who's currently at Stanford, who says, "Thank you for this brilliant lecture, Kay. What would you say has been your most personally meaningful experience in all of the tremendous work you've done to fight racism?"
Oh my God.
I always have the tough questions.
You know, the times when I feel like I'm in the right place is when I have been able to make common cause with civil society groups that come to us and they know what they want of us, and that I can fight for that and give them that. We just had Brazil come before us, and we had like 80, maybe 90 civil society people from Brazil. Okay. And I spent hours and hours and hours with them. This is outside meeting because I wanted to make sure that I asked the questions of the government that they needed asked, and I probed what they needed, and the outcome document that I wrote was exactly what they needed. That's when I feel that I'm doing something that's worthwhile. I felt very good about doing we have a process called early warning, urgent action, that Tendai knows. And I'm the head of that process. I just did a decision on that targeted the US, the UK, and other similar governments, saying that they were violating their obligations under our convention by not voting for a waiver of the TRIPS agreement, to allow countries to get the right to manufacture their own vaccines, to get the kind of equipment they needed to actually put shots in arms and all of that. That made me feel good. Now, they didn't do it. but when I can really go to the core of a problem and make a real difference. I felt the same when I went to evaluate, when I was a special rapporteur on minorities. I went to an area that had a lot of reports on there being a genocidal event in this place. But it just seemed like nobody had ever been there, truly. And it seemed like a little bit of a rumor. And I decided that was the first place I was going as a special rapporteur. And it was hard to get there. There were no hotels to spend the night in. It was rough going. There was no place to eat. So I could tell why people had not been there. But I got there, and the first night I was there, I called, and this is one of the things I learned to do is first, when I go to countries, I ask for a meeting with women. So the women gathered. It was late at night because they had to go to the fields and et cetera. There were no men. There were no adult boys. And, we sat around the fire and I said, tell me what happened. And, they said, you're the first person that's come ever to ask us what happened. And that made me feel like what I was doing was working. So, I think that my power is limited. We have the power of the bully pulpit. We are intermediaries, or we can see ourselves, most don't now see them, but I see myself as an intermediary serving civil society needs, speaking truth to power. When I can do that effectively, that's when I feel that I've done something worth being.
So we can take one or two more questions from the audience, one or two more online, the next question will come back.
Much done. Thank you, Gay and Hank, for being such inspirations and opening doors for the rest of us. I wanted to ask, when I worked at the NAACP Defense Fund around the same time, maybe a little before John Pete, your husband, has led the organization. They did send me to Durban to represent the LDF, and I did have a UN Special Rapporteur visit one of my clients in prison, and she wrote a letter to President Clinton, and a year later, Clinton did release her, give her a presidential pardon, released her from prison.
Oh, yes, that was
Kimba Smith, right? And, we had a big letter writing campaign. Historically Black colleges, and got lots of young people to write letters. But, it seems like these things kind of ebb and flow. And I'm wondering what we do in law schools for bridging these two tracks between domestic civil rights, international human rights. So going back to Sean's whole question, I know you're teaching a clinic on global racism, and certainly George Floyd's murder, I think, did galvanize. We understood people marched around the world, and we saw the connection between these movements. but it really ebbs and flows, and, maybe you can even tell us what you're doing in your class to try to bridge, bridge the gap.
Well, the first thing I think really is that every law school course, whatever it's about, ought to integrate international law into it. And that every course ought to be about the rights of people against the law. And if that's it, then everything I said today would fit in lots of courses. And you talk about the institutions that are relevant to whatever course you're teaching, be it international economic matters or what. So I think that, from the beginning, we have to stop setting the rest of the world aside. I'm not sure they do that in other countries when they teach law. But if, we're in a globalized world, so I think it ought to be integrated into everything. So that's one thing. I used to go every year to the Ailey House event that the Legal Defense Fund would have, the annual sort of Business Civil Rights Today. And I would talk about the international aspects. But even there, it was an add-on. It was separate. It was, ghettoized. And I think that it shouldn't be. If I were running LDF today, I would have advocacy as part of every strategy, just as that particular case was an advocacy case primarily. And then, the UN opens up to you in terms of possibilities for adding in advocacy at the global level. So I think that's one thing to think about.
Professor Allison Ray.
So thank you so much for your talk, and thank you also to Henry for having inspired me to think about things in ways that I might not otherwise have thought about. And specifically, you have inspired me now to have an idea and ask you a question that would not have otherwise occurred to me. So I am, as I just had the pleasure of telling Hank a couple of minutes ago at the beginning, I'm in the process of, I've organized a symposium. I teach tax, I teach international tax, and anyway, with the help and support of the law school, which is a sponsor of the symposium together with other organizations, it is a symposium titled The Federal Income Tax, Racially Blind but Not Racially Neutral. And in among the roster of folks that are speaking is Steve Dean, who has written about international tax and about racism in international tax. But the idea of going to the UN and getting the UN on board with a project that might look at implicit racism in tax systems all over the world, that had not occurred to me until just now. Do you think there's any chance that somebody at the UN might be receptive to the notion that looking at the effective tax system on the rights of people and disparate effects on people of color might have any legs?
Well, I'd have to think about that, but I don't think it's far-fetched. I mean, I'm not sure. Just as I talked about how there are other institutions that have, as Janet Yellen, she's been to international economic institutions talking about tax and what tax, structures that globally will do for being able to reform the lives of people in countries. So I don't think it's far-fetched at all. I mean, right now, and this is one of the points I said earlier that we're struggling with, this is about a limited, as it is in the UN right now, set of normative framework. And it really, this ought to be expanded in a way that allows it to speak more directly to issues like that. Certainly the Business and Human Rights Forum ought to be looking at tax, is it, James? Looking at tax issues. And it should be looking at it in the framework of human rights. Think about that forum as that it's not very human rights oriented, even though it has that name. But it's missing the core points about human rights. But yes, I would think so. You know, I mean, even if as Janet Yellen and others have determined that corruption is a major obstacle to meeting the needs of people at home. And, you know, tax havens, et cetera, are major vehicles for corruption. So I think she's doing.
Thank you. All right, so I could listen to you all day, but I really am gonna cut questions off now. We have 2 more questions in the chat, and 1 more question to the audience, and then let everyone get to the reception. So the one of the chat questions comes from Randy Olson, who's a student here at Temple Law School, who asked, do any of these human mechanisms to combat racism apply to fighting things like environmental racism, climate change, and racialized
Now, we ought to ask today that question, because she just wrote, as the special rapporteur on racism, a major report on climate change as a racism issue. And it's a phenomenal, you know, report. And this is what I said, we got to start pulling all of this stuff into here. If we can't move that out, we got to pull it all into this structure. You know, the special rapporteurs have a sort of a freedom that allows them to do that when they're good people like, you know, today. So yes, indeed, climate change, and give that student an A.
And so we have a question from JJ Larkins, who's the editor-in-chief of the International.
Thank you so much for this incredible lecture. Randy's actually also on the International Creative Law Journal. Wonderful. So we'll get an A from us for sure. My question has to do from the perspective of a young lawyer who's concerned about combating racism, anti-racism. What would you say to young lawyers who maybe have doubts or concerns about international law and international governance being the appropriate forum for a possible career path to do those things, as opposed to other things that we've talked about in law school, like criminal justice reform and, you know, maybe more traditional routes that we would think of for anti-racism thought. So hoping you would speak to that.
Well, what are you asking me? Can you get a job or?
I think that's the question. Well, possibly. But no, my question comes because I'm in a consultant human rights class right now with Professor Schuster, and on the first day, she had to do an exercise where we stood at different ends of the classroom, depending on whether we thought international human rights law was an appropriate vehicle for promoting human rights, or if we thought it was toothless, and that because international law has enforcement capabilities, etc., should we even study this? So I guess what would you say to those people who are on that side that believe that it's toothless and are just beginning our legal careers?
Well, toothless. I think I could just say yes. but you know, every day we try to make it, you know, have teeth. And the way we make it have teeth is that we turn to you and say, listen, if your government keeps doing that, don't elect them again. You know, I mean, we don't have an army. We don't have, we don't have that kind of power, unfortunately, but that's the way the UN is developed. But there are other kinds of power in the world. And that's what I think international law instructors need to keep emphasizing. You know, none of this would happen without some people that pushed it. I mean, some non-governmental people that pushed it. And I'm always hearing, you know, like, I co-teach the human rights course at Fordham. And my co-teacher gives the first class where, you know, and these are the governors here and ambassadors here and secretary. And I said, well, what about the NGOs? We're the engine that makes all of this happen. And it does have an impact. And I'm not sure that the impact is any softer than other impacts. You got to take a person to court and get a decision made person. You know, most things move in ways that involve softer approaches. Laws get made because people are convinced that this is right and this is wrong. They're, you know, rule of law. I have a hard time telling. Because I teach a lot of classes of people from other countries, and the rule of law thing is more difficult to explain than I thought it would be. But certainly for the US, it's getting harder and harder to explain. But you know, the world works in a lot of, there are a lot of forces in the world. And you can be a part of that force. What else is there? You could draft the law. We draft laws. You know, you could get those laws passed. We get a lot of laws passed. You know, it's, and this is what I think international law instructors need to make clear, that this is a real thing here. You know, and yes, you know, we're not the Security Council, but then I would bet that if you put, you know, what we've achieved next to what the Security Council has achieved, we'd be looking good. Because, you know, because they're so bad, but also. I just think that there are a lot of other ways that law is made and that respect for law is made. And if we don't get it this way, again, this is a globalized world. That, you know, there are no ghettos anymore. You know, there's no isolated, you know, place anymore. If, you know, Russia bombs Ukraine, you know, people starve in a lot of places that you can't imagine. So diplomacy is a real thing. This is what we do, diplomacy. And I think this is very important to get over to. Well, you can't get a job. So, you know, I think that's important. And we need to have, you know, one of the things that has concerned me a lot about the field is that when I got into it, because of a lot of things, we were not going to be government agents, you know? And that allowed us to be advocates of a different approach, a different way. Always, not mouthpieces for one way or another. We were non-aligned. And now, because getting jobs seem to be more important than it used to be, I don't know. Most people go into international law field who are going into it, go through being the government, the State Department, the field. And I think that what our world needs are independent voices. And we need to strengthen those voices. And we do have power. So that's something I feel very, very deeply. All of this, it was people that pushed this. It was George Floyd. It was Mamie Till's mother, Mamie Till. It was individuals who said to the world, as Polonius boy said, the world is taken to the UN. Somehow he believed. And I think that it's that belief that keeps the world moving in a lot of different ways. So, thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Thank you for the clear historical rendition of steps and missteps that have roiled the in regards to race and the applicant just said. Great lecture. And now we're going to ask Hank to come up because we have a couple of. Yes. Thank you very much.
I get the fun job. Thank you so much. We are delighted to welcome you here. This has been lifting and challenging and interesting and thoughtful and all the things that you want on a Friday afternoon. And so thank you, Hank. And please enjoy the reception that's behind. Thank you, Dorothy Lee. And thank you to Jaya for making this happen.